All right, this is going to be fun, everybody. This is going to be a great hour. I've been following this guy for a while. He's extremely smart, and the media covers him a lot too. And he's something. It's Curtis Yarvin, also known by the pen name. You're gonna have to pronounce the first word for me.
Mencius Moldbug.
Very, very prolific. That's one way to say it. And he has thought-provoking ideas that I just love. I don't agree with them all, but it pushes boundaries and makes you reconsider things. Curtis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be on.
So Curtis, how about a brief introduction? How'd you get into this? You have a unique approach to how you think about some of the problems the country faces.
Yeah, so I started blogging about this stuff about 15 years ago, and I sort of grew up as a very normal kind of blue state American, really. Actually, my dad was in the Foreign Service, which is kind of the elite of the deep state. So you might say that I grew up inside the deep state, and after a while, I sort of stopped believing in it. And then I kind of tried to believe in some of these alternatives to it. And it's sort of, I came to the conclusion that there's really a lot of fakeness there on both sides. And maybe to a certain extent, you're watching the Harlem Globetrotters against the Washington Generals. And so what do we do about the Washington Generals is the most important question, I think, in the world today.
So which side is which?
The Generals would be the Republicans.
Oh, is that right?
That is right.
And the Harlem Globetrotters are the Democrats?
That's right.
So you write analytically, and I just want to make sure I give credit where credit's due. You said a line in one of your writings where you said, every time the bad guys say democracy, just replace it with oligarchy.
That's right. That's right. Because what they're talking about there is sometimes you'll see like the Soros people use the phrase civil society. That means oligarchy. And what oligarchy means is the rule of the administrators, the rule of the experts, the rule of the Faucis. That's the sort of, Fauci is more invulnerable. He retired recently, but, his job tenure was considerably safer than George III's. And, if somebody passed a law saying we're not going to have gain-of-function research and Fauci and his friends want gain-of-function research, that's not going to stick. And so you're looking at absolute power here. It's very important to sort of recognize the power of all governments is absolute. They can do anything they want. The question is how power is spread around that oligarchy. And what you have is these little pieces of absolute power in the hands of the Faucis, and sort of for every kind of policy area, there's someone like Fauci, there's someone in the academic community, someone in the New York Times who basically has a lock on that policy. And what we've seen is that those policies get more and more deranged until we had this incredible pandemic that they basically literally went out and invented to basically get more grants. And realizing, the sort of just one example of the rule of these people and how sort of Soviet it's become. COVID was like Chernobyl, but like killing, 100,000 more people.
Yes.
Times as many people.
And I guess the one of the positives is that people now have a face and a name where they can now see the face of the quote-unquote deep state, Fauci.
Yeah.
But the point you're making is there's hundreds of these operatives.
There's hundreds of these operatives, and it's the structure that they're in that is actually... often people sort of think that it's these people's ideology that is sort of the cause of just the craziness of their decisions. I would say that actually the structure is the cause of the ideology, that progressivism is something that you're going to get inherently out of any system of oligarchical rule.
Is the design of the American system, does it lend itself to inevitable oligarchy?
There have been many American systems historically. When you look at, there's something they do in France where they number the republics. They have the first, second, third. Now we're on the fifth republic, I think. In the U.S., basically, we see the present system of government really dates to Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. And whatever happened before that is basically ancient history.
So that's interesting. Would you say Woodrow Wilson started that cause set in motion? I mean, I give it... At least the Claremont Hillsdale people would put a lot of blame or credit on the Wilsonian historicist.
Sure, shift. I think that the Claremont people tend to place a little more attention on ideas and maybe on personalities than I do, and I'm sort of more interested in the kind of structure of historical movements.
That's interesting. So
but, certainly Wilson and FDR come out of the same early American progressivism.
But you would say FDR created the actual architecture of the modern administrative state.
That's right.
Okay,
Absolutely
so let's dive into that. There's so many by the way, you're super well read, and this is so interesting. So FDR was the longest serving president, served a long period of time during a quote-unquote depression that lasted significantly long, but did he knowingly build an administrative state for decades and centuries of power, or you don't really care?
What we call the administrative state, as academics say, or deep state, as we like to say on TV, is essentially FDR's personal administration without its head. So FDR was really operating not quite as a dictator, but really almost as a dictator. He was certainly a dictator in foreign policy.
Confiscated gold.
In domestic policy, there were some areas of resistance to him. He wasn't Stalin exactly. He couldn't order people shot, but he was basically in charge of the federal government. And essentially, and the way he was in charge of the federal government, he created many, many new agencies in D.C., the so-called alphabet soup. He used every lever he could, many of them very informal levers, to take over the old agencies. And then when he dies, he's replaced by Harry Truman, who's basically a nobody. And what happens is all the power that he'd held in his hands sort of goes down into this administrative state that he created.
That's an interest. I've never heard that theory before. So you're saying that it was almost a fracturing and it went down all these separate tributaries. And so, like, when FDR broke, the power center decentralized.
That's exactly right.
And it never has been able to consolidate.
And it never
upwards.
has been able to consolidate because nobody, especially, I think personally,
That's really
my theory, and it's impossible to prove, is that FDR, certainly in 44 when he runs for election, knows he's dying. The American people don't even know he's in a wheelchair. He knows he's dying. And so as his successor, he picks this literal nobody.
From Missouri,
who's a machine politician from Missouri, not even a New Dealer. And people are like, why did he pick this nobody? And the answer is that nobody will ever have that much power again.
So you can't prove it, but your speculation is that the succession plan was that my power will be broken to a million pieces.
Exactly, and therefore it will never be destroyed. And the thing is that it's amazing, and this guy really did conquer the world, right?
It's like Voldemort from a Harry Potter reference, like I will scatter my power amongst a million people.
Exactly. And this guy really did conquer the world. At the time that he dies, he really thinks Stalin is working for him. And so he doesn't quite realize that, the Cold War is about to break out. He still thinks Stalin is his guy. He's conquered the world. And the thing is, you got to understand, as you go back in D.C., in time in D.C., it becomes more and more monarchical. Things go more from the top down. It works more like a company, less like a bureaucracy. And the people are actually really good. These really are the best and the brightest in D.C. in the 30s. Now, they have a lot of bad ideas, but they're very, very capable.
Yeah, they are that idea of a civil servant.
Yeah.
They have families. They're invested in the country. They're not overly ideological.
They're the best Americans. And so if you're
That's
looking
so
for
interesting.
you're looking for people,
the Scandinavian model.
If you're looking for people with that level of talent today, you're mostly not going to find them in the government. You're going to find them in Silicon Valley. You're going to find them in various areas of finance. But like people that good can't stand working in Washington today.
Do you think that they gravitated towards D.C. in the 30s out of duty or honor or the prestige of working for the government, or is it just because the country was a better country?
All of those. It was an incredible experience. It's like the experience of being here's one way to convey the experience of being in FDR's early New Deal. It's like you graduated from Harvard with this degree in this new field of economics. Somebody, somebody who knows somebody who knows Felix Frankfurter or something. You get a phone call. Your friend is like, hey, why don't you come to D.C.? You're like, what would I be doing? He's like, I have no idea. Just come. You show up, they give you a desk, an office. You're like, here's $6 million, go electrify Arkansas. That is not the experience of a young man coming to D.C. today.
Or here's a thing called the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Yeah. Good luck.
Good luck. And they go out.
It's kind of empowering.
It's incredibly empowering. And they go out and they do this stuff.
Yes.
And they have
super authority.
Super authority. And the thing that really You know, one in my all of my like historical researches, one of the things that struck me most is there's a classic book called "The Making of the President" 1960 by T.E. White, T.H. White, T.H. White, I think, and he's talking to someone who is part of the Kennedy machine, and we remember Kennedy as this era of like the new frontier, this bright optimism. We're going to do everything. At least libs remember Kennedy that way.
Yes.
And he's talking to one of these people, and then he talks to like a New Dealer. And the New Dealer is just like after the New Deal, like everything is bland, everything is boring, everything is dead, right? And like the distance from the new frontier to now.
Yes.
If you're working and you like you had all these people come in the Obama era who'd all like watch The West Wing and they all wanted to like West Wing it.
Yeah, well,
right?
they were LARPing as West Wingers. So Curtis, stay right there. We're going to keep this going. This is a great conversation. We're going to get to how do you assail the deep state? How do you restore is it possible to restore representative government? Do we need a CEO as president? I love all this. Email us freedom@charliekirk.com. We're going to go through the breaks, guys, and I will get to rough greens, I promise. Email us freedom@charliekirk.com. Hang on one second. So Curtis, the only other president I would ask you about that tried to combine the distillation of power was Nixon. Did he get close or not, or was it like
that's an excellent question, because I think that no, he didn't get close, and
a distant second?
Nixon of course is coming from the right rather than from the left, which is obviously very important. And Nixon's theory, Nixon was probably, I'd say, in terms of IQ, maybe the smartest president of the century. Maybe it was Nixon, maybe it was Wilson. This is a really smart, capable guy, comes from sort of deep America. He's a California Quaker. And Nixon's idea is that he's going to come in, he's going to be the president of the silent majority. He's going to take all this like crazy hippie stuff, and he's going to show Americans how a government that works. He's going to take over Washington, run it like a grown-up, and do all this grown-up stuff. The problem is that in order to take over Washington and run it like a grown-up, basically, so Nixon, for example, in 1968, Cronkite declares the Vietnam War is lost, the Tet Offensive is won. Nixon's like, you know what? I can come in and I can run the government so well, I can both win the Vietnam War and pull American troops out of Vietnam. And he does. The Viet Cong are completely defeated by 72, 73. This has been sort of retconned out of history. He beats Ho Chi Minh. He creates this South Vietnam that basically relies only on American funding and American air power. Congress is like, okay, you think you won the war. We're just going to pull, the funding and the air power, and then North Vietnam is going to conquer South Vietnam in a massive conventional ground invasion. Wow, we basically won't even sell the South Vietnamese bullets. And then we're going to retcon this so that everybody thinks Walter Cronkite was right in 1968. And that's how most people think the Vietnam War today.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that just an amazing level of power? And so he's going in there, and I was at a seminar recently, like New Discoveries on Watergate, and I actually talked to some old Nixon aides. Dwight Chapin and Jeff Shepard. Amazing guys in their 80s, still sharp as tacks. And basically really reflecting, the whole Watergate thing was really the start of lawfare. I don't want to go too deeply into this, but it was like lawfare 1.0.
Yes.
And basically Nixon acts as if, he'll make these great speeches. He'll be like, the enemy is the professors, the enemy is the journalists, like really base stuff, right? And then he'll go out and behave as if the enemy is Ho Chi Minh.
That's amazing. And so, and Nixon, in some ways, was a geek of the administrator, right?
Exactly right.
Right. But even he was not able to...
Not even close.
Bring back these pieces
that
shattered.
And pull the cables together.
So the only other, I know this is from the right, but the only other person that attempted that was the closest thing was Dick Cheney in Bush. Is this not...
Maybe over some pieces of...
Maybe of the national security state?
Yeah, over some pieces of the national security state. And so you see sort of the national security state, definitely like the Iraq War and that stuff was sort of the last gasp of a DOD that
Yes.
thought differently from the State Department. Nowadays, it's all state all the time. I mean, state
Yes.
didn't want the Iraq invasion, right? And so you see, like, when you look at people who survive from sort of the Nixon period with the Nixon mindset into today, into the Trump administration, you're looking at guys like John Bolton or William Barr. Right.
Yes.
And the thing is, Barr, it's a pity because these are very capable people. But the thing is, they're still, and they know these systems very well, but they're still operating on this kind of Nixon theory.
Yes.
So Barr comes in and basically he's like, we're going to stop this Russiagate stuff. But he's not like, oh, wow, Andrew Weissman's 15 guys all deleted their cell phone. Like,
This is so important. Okay.
Yeah.
Stay right there, Curtis. We're going to welcome back radio. I hope you're enjoying this. I certainly am. Email us freedom@charliekirk.com. Okay, welcome back. Finish that thought. So Barr said we're not going to go after Weissman.
Yeah, Barr is not like we're going to clean out can't basically like clean out DOJ and basically sort of stop this incredible kind of lawfare against the executive branch from the executive branch. He's just like, okay, we're not going to do this anymore, and we're going to make DOJ work on behalf of the American people. And like the time for that is really over. Like you just can't, you can't imagine doing that. You don't have the power to do that in so many ways. And you're basically not doing what the American people asked you to do when they elected Trump.
So the one, I want to get to this other baseline conversation, then we can get to the more current. Can you explain to our audience then who calls the shots? Who's in charge? This is a question I get a lot. And my experience is that it's kind of unclear. It's kind of a culture almost.
Yeah, the question is
do you
almost.
understand what I'm saying?
The question is almost an error because you're basically you're looking for like who's in charge, and the closer you get to like talking to the center, talking to the people who really matter, they're just like, oh my God, no one is in charge.
Well, so that's what's important because, and I'm not faulting anyone that believes this because there's some truth to it, but there is this Wizard of Oz type belief that there's someone just calling shots.
Yeah.
And it's Barack Obama from Martha's Vineyard and says, investigate, indict.
Yeah, and there are pieces of that, I'm sure. But
the
it's
bureaucracy
not,
operates completely differently than that.
It operates completely differently from that because the whole thing, the bureaucracy is like basically, the fundamental problem, if I had to say one thing to your audience of patriots, like that I wanted them to remember that, it's not, when they say democracy, they mean oligarchy. That's really, really important. People should really get that. The second thing to say, and I love going around to saying this, people that are really in the loop and in deep in DC, because I've never heard anyone disagree with this. We don't have an executive branch. We have a legislative branch. It's almost like a legislative judicial branch in some ways. And the way, because when you look at the so-called executive branch, what you see is that the personnel, the policy, and the budget of this are set by the Congress, which is a completely non-democratic and it's the Congress is a buffer against politicizing the deep state, which means democratizing the deep state. And so if you look at the influence that the president has on the executive branch, basically, what is an executive order? It's basically a tweet. There's really not terribly big difference between an EO and a tweet. And the ability to even by, you have this org chart that looks like the org chart of a private company in which basically control flows from the top down, but it's completely illusory. And if you stack that whole system with patriotic Americans, and which unfortunately was not really done in the last administration, but there's something called the Plum Book. Do you know the term Plum Book?
Of course, the 5,000 positions in the federal government.
5,000 positions that Trump gets to appoint, right? And you basically put 5,000. I don't know where you'd find these people, but you put 5,000 really, really capable people who really see the world the way you do, Charlie.
And want to work for the federal government.
And want to work for the federal government. If you take these imaginary people and put them in and make them exist somehow and put them, my friend Saurabh Sharma is trying very hard.
No, he's doing a great job.
He's doing a great job. But the thing is, here's what's going to happen. They are basically going to parachute in there. they're going to find that they have no way to constrain the permanent staff who nominally work for them. And every one of these people is going to be offered a choice. First of all, either you turncoat immediately, you become a traitor, or we are going to destroy your professional life. We are going to saddle you with hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal bills, because this lawfare industry that we're seeing is just ramping up. We're going to saddle you with hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal bills. You will never have a career in this space at all again. And like, we're going to do everything to destroy you personally, but certainly professionally. Or you can just turncoat and, maybe after 4 years we'll trust you and you can get some jobs. You can kind of burrow into the bureaucracy.
I have heard this story hundreds of times of people that go into the bureaucracy and they are confronted.
Yeah.
And if they choose incorrectly, within a month, hell is unleashed upon them.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I can tell you, whether it be in housing and urban development or whether it be in the Department of Interior, it is systemic across the board, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is not an inch of turf that they will concede, not anywhere. And it was as bad, Curtis, and I want to get into this. Trump would say, I want to do A, and the bureaucrats would say, huh.
Yeah.
And they would just throw away the order. They would literally, and it would take 4, 5, 6, sometimes 8 follow-ups, months, until you could even get 1% of what the order would say. There was daily subversion. I want to, and by the way, this is a huge challenge. What can you even do about that? Email us freedom@charliekirk.com. Curtis Yarvin continues. Okay, so Curtis continues. What
can we even do about that? Well, I have an answer, but you may not like it.
Okay.
And your audience might not like it.
We want the truth.
Yeah, the truth. And I think that I feel like Americans are really like one of the things that as we were talking about before the show, like American conservatism sort of may not be quite there yet, but like it's waking up a lot.
No, it is all the best. I call it the great melting. Like it's finally this ice age of these old ideas are melting away. It's not there, but you can start to see these new things come out.
And you're just starting to see DC for what it really is. Like you go like in your 11th grade civics class and you like read about how a bill becomes a law or whatever.
And it's so ideal.
And then, there's a budget and then like even the freaking omnibus bills, like, it has no resemblance to Congress isn't even a parliamentary body. Like it's not a talking shop. People don't actually like debate there. It's this bizarre system of committees, right? And so, the idea that like like if you could bring the founders back and basically show them DC as it is today, they would just be like, what does this even have to do with the thing we created? Like, how are you basically using these 18th century documents to justify this thing?
That's the tragedy, is that they don't need to rewrite the Constitution. They've just ignored it.
Yeah.
They just kind of built their own thing.
They've made it a dead letter. And the thing is, you know what else is a dead letter? The Articles of Confederation.
Yes.
Nobody ever abolished the Articles of Confederation. They just said, well, this isn't a thing anymore.
This is not working.
And they essentially sort of abolished the Constitution within sort of, nominally adhering to it. Of course, about Chris Caldwell and
I did a whole show on MLK yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm a believer that we actually have two American foundings. The second was in the 1960s, and MLK is the George Washington of the cult of anti-racism.
I mean,
but I don't want to get too far down.
I would say that was a minor founding compared to the founding of the 1930s.
But the modern elites honor that one more than 1776 or.
Oh, absolutely. And 1786 is sort of, like unrecognizable from this world. And so, I guess I would say that, stepping way back and looking at kind of the grand sweep of American history, I would say one of the most brilliant things, the founding generation is sort of very different from the abstractions that people see. These are real people with real flaws and real, in a real situation. And yet, they were brilliant. They were in the real world. They were doing real things. And one of the things they did in the Constitution that was kind of a work of genius that I think we can really learn from is they never specified which of the three branches is in charge. And so,
but wasn't that part of the brilliance?
That was part of the brilliance.
I'm not questioning their wisdom.
That was part of the brilliance, because basically what that allowed to have happen, as Aristotle described, 2,500 years ago, there are three sort of forms of government and modes of power. These are democracy, the rule of the many, oligarchy, the rule of the few, and monarchy, the rule of the one. And what we see in American history is about every 75 or 80 years, sort of like the San Andreas Fault, you basically get a presidential government. Your government goes from being, sort of the rule of the many is pretty hard to pull off these days. The rule of the few is pretty normal in this system. That breaks down and you get a president like Washington or Lincoln or FDR, who is really personally in charge of the federal government in the way that Elon Musk is in charge of SpaceX.
That's a great analogy, because I'm reading the Walter Isaacson book on Elon. He is the closest thing to, and I don't mean this pejoratively, he is a dictator over those companies.
He is a king. He is a monarch. He is a CEO.
What he says goes, and he is the arbiter of what success is and what is not.
And when you look at how everything that works in our world works, whether it's a restaurant with a chef, whether it's a movie with a director, whether it's a company with a CEO, you see this pattern sort of repeated everywhere, where you put one person in charge, you make him or her accountable, but you don't let anyone micromanage that. And basically, authority flows from the top down. So in Washington, there's a saying that personnel is policy. And so, if you want some policy to run, get the right people in charge.
Yes.
That's not how SpaceX works.
So that's super important. Email is freedom@charliekirk.com. Curtis Yarvin, we're getting somewhere. Subscribe to our podcast.
On air and on fire for the preservation of our nation. The Charlie Kirk Show.
That's not how SpaceX works. Great example is the Falcon rocket that Elon Musk sent out, did it with a ragtag team of 500 people on the fourth attempt. The competitor, NASA, or even Boeing's division that was working with NASA, 50,000 employees, and they couldn't get it done.
That's right. Because basically NASA is full. When you look at an oligarchic system, at a bureaucracy, the way it works is by process. Everything has a process. Nothing is left to individual discretion. And if there is individual discretion, Fauci has some individual discretion. The way he uses that is by ganking the process. He manipulates procedural outcomes. He's like, I want this procedure to let my friends do gain of function research and get more grants. So how can I make this come out to say, oh, my friends in at Duke in China are going to go and find all the bat coronaviruses and mutate them to make them more dangerous. And that's literally how we got COVID, right? And so you have all of these process-based systems. Everyone is covering their ass at all times. There's no accountability in a process-based system. No one can ever be held personally accountable. Who's been held personally accountable for COVID? No one.
And no one will be.
No one will be. And that's a
black pill.
That's a black pill. That's a bitter pill to swallow, right? And so, but the thing is, here's the important thing. When you're a libertarian, you basically think of this the private sector, which is operating on libertarian principles, is good. The public sector is bad. This is why SpaceX operates better than NASA. Well, if you go all the way back to the Apollo project or the Manhattan Project, we just saw Oppenheimer, right? Pretty good movie, portrays Oppenheimer's a bit more of a communist than that movie portrays. Otherwise, pretty accurate, and it portrays the scene pretty well. And the thing is, you look at the Manhattan Project, that's the most successful engineering project of all time. It's a government project. It's pretty much carried out almost exclusively by progressives, or as some people say, communists.
Communist, I would.
Communist is just a euphemism for progressive. And
Vice versa. Yeah.
And my grandparents were American communists. They always said progressive.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, back to the 30s. The meaning of the word has never changed. And not in the 20s it meant something different. In the teens maybe, not since the 30s. And so, you have this system where you're just like, wait a second, whether it's public or private isn't the determining factor. Whether people are libertarians or communists isn't the determining factor. What is the factor that makes the Manhattan Project work? And can you imagine trying to do a Manhattan Project with the way government-funded science works today, the way NASA works today? It'd be impossible. It'd take 100 years.
And it is, again, I love the Elon Musk analogy because it's illuminating, and it is kind of the buried lead of the Walter Isaacson book, which is he doesn't acknowledge Walter Isaacson's a lefty, right? He's even kind of attacked Elon in the interviews subsequent from the book. But the buried lead is, oh my goodness, how did he get it done? Oh my goodness, he also had Tesla. And the buried lead is because he went in, he had full, complete authority and control.
Absolutely
It so happens he's a genius. No joke. And he also has his own demons and all that. But imagine Elon having to work through a committee.
Yeah.
There is no Tesla. There's no SpaceX. It got so bad that there is a chapter in the Walter Isaacson book on Elon. It was Christmas Eve. SpaceX was bankrupt. Tesla was bankrupt. He put all of his own money in. He was calling bankers.
Story.
He was throwing up. He was nauseous. He hadn't eaten for 2 weeks. Literally, true story.
Yeah.
He had 5 kids that he wasn't even able to see. He was going through a divorce, and he had this Churchillian grit where he had to all of a sudden be the guy that birthed it. It wasn't a committee. It wasn't democracy.
Wasn't a committee. It wasn't democracy. It wasn't.
It was Superman.
They didn't take a vote of all the SpaceX engineers to say what fuel are we going to use on the rocket.
It was one guy on Christmas Eve that took out a $20 million non-secured loan.
And if you look at basically everything around you, look at everything in this studio, it was made by a monarchy. Your computer there, Apple. Made by a monarchy.
Steve Jobs is a jerk. I was going to use other language.
He's a complete.
But he and Elon have the same sort of Caesar-ism. I'm in charge. You're not. Here's the goal.
These are not good people. They are not nice people. They are not people you want to be around. They are useful people. They are useful people. Think of them as tools. Don't be jealous of them. Don't hate them for being narcissistic jerks. Yeah, they're narcissistic jerks. But you know what? Basically, if it wasn't for Steve Jobs, you wouldn't have that laptop there.
No, I mean, so you're a historical genius. And is history defined by a small group of mostly men, sometimes women, of quote-unquote useful jerks that assume power and do the impossible?
There's a lot of that.
The men of history, as Hegel would call them, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And the thing is, and when you're looking for, I wouldn't say the enormous power has come out of collectives in various ways. Enormous power has come out of the masses. The problem is the masses, and this sort of goes back to this sort of essential there's a kind of rock, scissors, paper thing going on with democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy. And one of the things that we have to cope with in the real world today, if you go back to the 18th century and you look at sort of why America became a democracy, then you're looking at this nation, especially in Massachusetts, where all this kicks off. You're looking at this nation of incredibly virtuous people.
Well, that's right. They're Anabaptists.
They're incredibly godly. They're incredibly.
By the way, the state-based laws are the most based, no homosexuality.
Oh yeah, they organize. They organize instantly. They form these committees of correspondence. They form the Sons of Liberty. These are this is a world in which even more than 1776, America. Did you know that there was a color revolution in America in 1689?
There was really? That was before the CIA.
Yeah. That was the original idea.
Tell me about it. What was
when
that?
James II is overthrown by a Dutch invasion in England, James II, who of course is basically, he's not quite a Catholic. Well, he is a Catholic actually, but he's not governing as a Catholic. But he's on the Cavalier side of the Roundhead Cavalier divide, and of course Massachusetts is this kind of Roundhead colony, right? And so he creates this thing called the Dominion of New England, where they're going to put bishops in America or whatever. He's overthrown by this Dutch invasion. As soon as they hear the news about it in Boston, they just arrest the government instantly and restore their old kind of religious dictatorship form of. And the thing is, basically, the important lesson for today is a lot of people think If you remember the Tea Party, do you remember the Tea Party?
I was part of it.
What did it accomplish?
If the best spin is it might have paved the ideological for Trump.
It might have. It might have.
That's
and it might have.
Legislatively nothing, politically next to nothing. We maybe got a couple good senators, maybe, but it did open people's eyes to challenge paradigms that gave us Trump.
Yeah, it basically
made Trump possible. That's my theory.
It made show. I can go with that theory a little bit because basically what it did was, the Tea Party was people are like, this is America. If the people, the good salt of the earth, patriotic people in America, just like all get tired of their government at the same time, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And what they discovered is that nothing happens. And that's a really important lesson, is that if you get a lot of people together, nothing happens. Whereas if you look at people in Massachusetts in 1689, these are like, from today's perspective, they're not only are they incredibly virtuous and civic, they're also incredibly violent and energetic. And that is a weird combination that doesn't exist today at all.
No, it doesn't. So Curtis, I want to isolate on this because I'm obsessed with this, which is why I'm consuming the Elon book from a different approach. Because people are reading it like as a business book. I said, no, you're missing. This is the administration of power.
Yeah,
this is a guy that has built trillions of dollars of value, worth $250 billion, and literally has done quote unquote the impossible. Right? You love him or hate him, and isn't that the question that is in front of us as a society, which is who gets power? Who's in charge, and who's going to lead us out of this mess? And I guess the options in front of us is, well, we keep on doing what we're doing. Are you suggesting an Elon Musk-ish character as president?
I think there's no. I think there's sort of two ways. Yes, definitely, but I think there's two ways that can roll. I think we're of course in the situation that we're in, and we're not looking at anything but Trump versus Biden in 2025. And I'm very conflicted actually about this election, because having Biden in the White House, this sort of shambling husk of a man, really and my God, think about how much he's going to degenerate over the next 4 years. Like it's painful. I mean, in 2020, I was talking to someone who had worked for Biden, and his feeling was that Biden in 2020 was too old. And now he can't even walk off stage. Jill has to lead him off stage. It's incredible. And so seeing that is actually great for America and Americans, because they should see what their government really is. They should see, and the reality is Washington doesn't need the White House. You could have no White House at all, no president at all. The executive branch would work even better. Sometimes it's true, it sort of sends decisions up and they land on the president's desk and they give him 3 boxes to check, and he's supposed to check the middle one, and he checks the middle one, right? That's not what Elon Musk does. Elon Musk is proactive.
No.
This whole system is reactive.
Sleep on the floor of a gigafactory to make sure the battery is 2 millimeters lower on a car and suspend production.
And he'll go right down into all of those details, right? That's what a real manager does. What I would recommend, honestly, for Donald Trump, is he 80 yet? Is he almost 80?
Yes, but to be clear, his health, he's got gusto.
He's got gusto. And the thing is, what I would recommend for Donald Trump is, I don't think Donald Trump really, when he was a CEO in the private sector, the Trump organization was never bigger than 20 or 30 people. It was a brand licensing.
It was a family office.
It was a family office, and it was a brand licensing organization, and they licensed that brand. Trump has so many sort of attributes of kingliness. He has this quality in Arabic that's called baraka, the quality of a king, right? What Trump is not good at is drilling down, detailed management, staying on top of things, having a long attention span, being Elon Musk. He's not Elon Musk. The right job for Donald Trump is not CEO of the government, it's chairman of the board.
Yes.
And if he was able to see himself as chairman of the board and to basically go out and say, hey, I'm going to go wherever you find these Elon Musks of today, I'm going to go
empower that person
and basically say, you know what? Hey, someone, I'm not going to mention any names, but I'm sure there's 100 people in Silicon Valley that could do this job, and basically say, you're going to basically shut down this fake executive branch that we have and create a new government. That's the level
And
of this.
I will take credit for it.
And I will take credit for it because I'm Donald Trump.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally okay, right? Actually, like the best managers, like they don't want to be on TV. There's an easy way to know that the White House is fake and lame. The easiest way to know that the White House is fake and lame. I'm sorry, I'm from Berkeley. I have to say fake and lame.
No, there was another word we could use, but
Yeah, it's fake and fey. I like the word fey. And is that the president spends like half of his time doing photo ops.
No, that's correct.
Do you think Elon Musk spends half of his time doing photo ops? Right? And so the thing is, and like you have all of these patriotic Americans out there, and they're voting sort of based on this emotional belief. They really think they're electing the CEO of America. They talk as if they're electing the CEO of America.
So I want to add something. If there is an opportunity to get this done, it's the only vector to get it done is through Trump. I see a path. You might disagree, but because I mean you're making sense.
There's always a future, but the thing is, never delay.
Stay there. All right. Good Ranchers. Delicious, safe, and convenient meal prep is just one box away. 2024 is your year to ditch the mystery meat aisle and get American meat delivered instead. If you want to start your year off right, then change the way you buy meat by switching to Good Ranchers. Make sure to subscribe and use promo code Charlie to claim over $200 in free chicken and New Year savings. GoodRanchers.com, American meat delivered. So check it out right now, GoodRanchers.com. Try their brand new weekly essentials box full of pre-trimmed beef and chicken that helps you meal prep so you can save time without sacrificing flavor. Go to GoodRanchers.com, American meat delivered. Promo code Charlie, claim over $200 in free chicken and New Year savings. GoodRanchers.com, American meat delivered. Check it out right now, GoodRanchers.com. Curtis continues. Let's keep on going to the breaks, guys, and we'll probably go a little bit over time, too, just to keep this going. Email us freedom@charliekirk.com.
Yeah, so...
Curtis.
Right. So, yeah, so you're basically like... When you look at the current plans that are being made for the next Trump administration, they're sort of, I know some of these people, they're really good people. It's not radical enough, and it can't be radical enough. And
Let's get some ideas then. Okay,
it's going to run.
You're an idea factory.
Yeah.
So let me paint it. Let's say at a chief of staff or VP level, we get that Elon Musk guy that doesn't want to be on the headlines. Okay, but he is a vicious 20-hour-a-day operator, and let's say that role gets filled. Okay, just for argument's sake. What else? Because you have a whole laundry list of creative ideas.
So basically, when you're filling that role, you have to, understand, and you have to tell the American people very straightforwardly and honestly, ideally before the election. Although FDR didn't do it before the election. FDR did it after the election, but it was a different world. You have to tell the American people before the election, hey, look, if you're going to vote for me, you got to understand that as president, I'm just going to run the country for the next 4 years. And I'm going to treat the other two branches of government as advisory because this is the only way to restore the executive branch from its present Babylonian captivity. So basically,
I will be King Cyrus.
I will be King Cyrus, and we'll have another election in 4 years. I'm still going to be accountable, and that election is going to be held in a totally different country. Because when you see real regime change in this world, think about East Germany turning into modern Germany. If you're in East Germany in like 1988 versus East Germany in 1992, your life changed.
Everything's different. Yeah.
Everything's different. Everything changes. And, I have a funny story, which is when Trump was originally elected, I was like, oh, my God, this is happening, but it's just way too soon. We're not ready. And
you were kind of right.
I was kind of right, but it was just way too soon. And at the time, my kids were 6 and 8, and they're going to this progressive Mandarin immersion school in San Francisco. And I tried not to talk about politics with my kids at all. Absolutely the best thing to do, especially if you're raising your kids there. But they, of course, were coming to me with all these questions. They're like, Trump is going to kill all the Muslims. He's going to whatever. You know how kids like amplify whatever they hear from their parents and take it to and my son comes to me. And he has a very specific question about the Trump world. He's like, how are we going to be able to go to the beach? What? How are we going to? I'm like, Henry, I heard you the first time. You're not making any sense. He's like, Pop, when Trump builds a wall around the country, how are we going to be able to go to the beach? And I'm just like, Henry, if you see anything besides political signs change as a result of this election, I'll be very, very surprised. In a crisis, that's a little different. I think a lot of the COVID calls mattered. I think who was president mattered a lot. But in a normal thing, it actually doesn't matter at all.
Curtis, stay right there. He said something I want to isolate and drill down on. Okay, email us freedom@charliekirk.com and subscribe to our podcast. Curtis is here. You said that we need to pitch to the American people regime change.
Yes. They need to basically, and the only way that, as Machiavelli says in his great work, Discourses on Livy.
I studied it with Anton this summer.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. As Machiavelli says in his Discourses on Livy, and, it was a long time ago, but really tell me you know more about political science than Machiavelli.
By the way, no one has surpassed Machiavelli's wisdom.
Yeah,
it's not even close.
No, he's amazing. And he was not just a
theorist. His
theorist.
understanding of the classics, but he was a political animal.
He was an animal. And he did that job. He worked in that space. And
he was trying to get a better one. That's what it was a job application.
It was a job application to Cesare Borgia, and
he's like, hey, here's all the stuff I know.
Here's all the stuff I know, right? And so the thing is that basically, here's the key in a way, is that when people vote in a presidential election, they're sort of thinking themselves in this kind of Norman Rockwell sense. Like, I care about this issue, I care about that issue, and I'm hiring this guy, and he's going to work for me in this office. And to realize that basically, no, you have to do something much more daring than that. You have to basically, for your vote to be powerful, you have to give away all of that power. And you have to say, when I vote for president in this 2024 election, basically, I'm voting for whoever wins for my guy to have all the power. I don't want to be I'm voting for you to do this, I'm voting for you to do that, I'm voting for you to close the border.
Are we ready for that as a country? And should we be? Because part of me, I'll be honest, is but don't we have separation of powers?
I know. You want to basically
I have all these built in.
You want to cling to sort of all of these things, but the thing is, all of these things are basically, these are things, frankly, Charlie, the Democrats don't believe in any of these things at all. They don't believe in the rule of law.
Are we held prisoner by our ideals?
We're held prisoner by our ideals. And the thing is, basically, the point has come where we have to choose between these old and very beautiful ideas and our country. And if we choose the ideals over our country is going to cease to exist. Because here's what's going to happen. Can I describe what's going to happen, where we're going to be if we continue on this course in 2050? We now have about 5 million people a year pouring over the border. We have everyone who is part of America's governing class, believing, you'll see it written all over the place in San Francisco, ninguna persona es ilegal. No human being is illegal. And it's really hard, if you think about it, to defend the idea that your human rights as a human being should depend on the GPS coordinates where your mother squeezed you out. That's a pretty tough position to defend at Harvard or Yale or whatever. It's only a matter of time before we see basically we already have seen it de facto, essentially an American Edict of Caracalla, where it's basically decided that everyone in the world is an American. And once everyone in the world is an American. Nobody is. And you're not going to see 5 million people coming over the border every year. You're going to see 50 million people. You're going to see basically, if you did a census in Africa and you said how many Africans would like to come to the U.S., you're looking at numbers that are more like 500 million. And basically, once that happens, the country no longer exists, and the country that you live in is a country that looks a lot like South Africa today. Been to South Africa lately?
Never will.
Wouldn't recommend it. And so, the thing is that basically, if you're choosing between that and your separation of powers and your, all of these things that were basically long ago captured by these progressives and have been worn as basically a skin suit by them for many, many years. Y'all are familiar with the skin suit technique.
I do, but tell us remind us.
So basically,
it's a beautiful analogy.
you take over, you
that
capture this institution,
and then wear the skin
and then
suit.
wear the skin, and you're just like, basically a wolf in sheep's clothing, and you sound like you're making these ba noises, but all you're saying is come here and get eaten. And so the thing is to recognize that happened, and it didn't happen recently. That's the whole 20th century is this happening. It's really the whole 20th century is this movement of basically elites recapturing the state from politicians. That is the story of 20th century America. And so when you try to roll that back and say, okay, we're going to give the power back to the people, you basically have to recognize the truth of what John Adams said when he said our Constitution
is for a moral and religious people.
Is made only for a moral.
Wholly inadequate. For
it's
the
wholly
media.
inadequate for any other, and power will go through it like a whale through a net. And this guy was from Massachusetts in the 18th
Whaler
century.
analogies made sense. Curtis, stay right there. I want to wrap this up. We're going to go for 10 or 15 more minutes.
Excellent.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Email us, freedom@charliekirk.com. The chat's on fire, everybody. We're going to keep this going. We're getting tons of emails. People love this. Stay right there on radio. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Subscribe to our podcast to listen to the entire conversation. The stream continues in just a second. Okay, the whale analogy. Finish that.
The whale analogy. And so the problem with the whale analogy, basically, if you go back to your sort of triangle of democracy, oligarchy, monarchy.
If those are the three choices.
If those are the three choices.
Aristotle was right, which
Aristotle was right,
probably was.
which he probably was. What you basically see is that patriotic Americans are a little bit stuck because they're basically trying to put the whale back in the net. The problem is the net has grown a lot weaker. And so the stock of popular energy, of popular virtue, civic virtue, we sort of saw on January 6th this, I'm not saying January 6th was this great act of evil or anything, but it was also, I think it was kind of a joke in a way, because we saw basically that was what happens when you try to do 18th century politics with a 21st century population. And, they got to the Senate floor, and then did they reorganize the Senate and start issuing decrees and taking over the military? And no, he had a guy with horns in his helmet, right? But when you picture what people in the 17th century, in 1689 in Boston, that would do, it would be over right there, right? And so the thing is, when you're trying to organize that popular energy into sort of the people acting over the government, you've got to realize that the strength just isn't there. And that's why essentially all of these attempts to sort of use democracy to fight oligarchy without going the other direction on the clock and saying, no, what you essentially need to do is you need to use all of the power that you have left in democracy in one moment, at one time, in one direction, to kick the thing back over into monarchy. And, you basically say, and you just, this whole idea on the American right of we're going to start by restoring the virtue of the American people. And first we're going to make a virtuous people, and then the virtuous people are going to be, strike back. Meanwhile, you're basically being outnumbered by the entire population of Nigeria while you're trying to create these virtues, right? And it's just impossible. It's never going to work. And so the thing is, basically, that's the terrible choice facing Americans. You have to basically lay down all of these ideals that have been stolen and been corrupted and say, no, actually, it was an amazing experiment. We tried it. It kind of worked for a while. Now we're going to go back to some version of the form of government that 99% of human beings have been governed by for 99% of history.
Does that frighten you at all?
Of course, it's but it frightens me in a way. If someone told me that I needed cancer surgery, God forbid, that would frighten me too. Yeah. But it wouldn't frighten me out of having the surgery.
Yeah, chemotherapy sounds terrible.
Chemotherapy sounds terrible. And the thing is, the problem is basically, what the political scene is right now. It's there's a patient going to the doctor. He goes to the Democratic doctor. He's like, I keep getting thinner. Why am I so thin? The doctor's like, great. I've never seen you look better. You're so thin. You're in such good shape. Keep it up. And then he goes to the Republican doctor, and the Republican doctor is like, yeah,
You have a parasite in your stomach.
you have cancer and you're losing weight because of, sarcopenia, and you're going to die. Fortunately, I have this pill right here that will cure you. It's called aspirin. There's no side effects. Just take it and you'll feel better. And that'll be $100,000. It's hard to decide which of these things is worse, because basically sort of the Republicans are telling you the truth, but they're also telling you that this thing that is not going to come within 3 or 4 orders of magnitude of working is going to work. And so in a way, they're still kind of lulling you to sleep about how bad the situation is and what has to be done. Here's the other thing, is that when people think about dramatic changes in power, they think about violence. Because in the 20th century, you saw a lot of political violence.
Russian Revolution.
This is not a violent nation. This is a nation of men who have never been in a fist fight. That's very historically unusual. And so when you think about liquidating the executive branch, you're not watching people march to pits being shot in the back of the neck. No, it's just like a company going out of business. It's like FTX going out of business. Maybe it's like Elon reorganizing Twitter. He doesn't have to shoot anyone. He just has to carry the kitchen sink in the front door, right? And so it's actually just this all of this, you'll see these democratic caricatures of what, the Democrats are always telling, basically, they're saying you're going to do the things you're not going to do. And they basically get you to promise to do the things you're not going to do, but you should do. And so there's sort of all of these fantasies about Trump becoming a dictator or whatever, and they're just cartoonish and sort of completely off base. And I'll tell you one other thing that you may not really like either. If someone does this, he can't do it on behalf of only one side of the American people. He has to say to the blue state people too, hey, I'm going to govern you in a way that suits you. You're actually going to like this. Like, your life is actually going to become more progressive out there just at the same time as all those red state people, don't have to worry about the schools turning their kids trans. Yeah, go have your kids go trans, have them do blue hair. That's what you want. But, we can't basically fight for these institutions at all. There has to be a sort of, at a cultural level, there has to be a kind of institutional divorce. And that divorce can be a peaceful, friendly kind of divorce within the same nation.
So to use first principles, and then I want to just challenge a couple of the other things
Please.
you said, is you say, if we don't embrace this, right, go towards some form of a monarchy, then we're going to have 50 million people coming in.
Yeah.
Can you strengthen how certain you are? Build out why you're so certain about that, because that is a prediction, and I get what you're saying, right? Total collapse, civilization over. And by the way, I find it hard to disagree. I just want to make sure, because that's what some people would say. Come on, stop with the dooming, stop with the blackpilling.
Sure,
it's a big statement.
If you went back to Americans of 1950 and you showed them the America of today, they'd be like, oh my God, how did we get here? And, the reality is that you don't have these decisions already. The decision to basically sort of tolerate this massive illegality. Charlie, for example, when you're going around passing laws, did you know that RICO explicitly applies to facilitating illegal immigration? You could have RICO prosecutions like the size of God. You could prosecute all of these Volags, all the people that are, certainly all the people, at ICE that are, basically breaking the law, but you don't have the infrastructure to do that. Who's going to run those prosecutions? What judges are you going to put that in front of? And so the thing is that it's actually really straightforward for people to make these decisions. Right now, as you know, the state of Texas is asking the Supreme Court to basically force Texas to not protect its state border. This is really just getting started.
So I guess I'm totally on board with the energetic executive, someone who runs the country like Tesla or SpaceX. But are we really? And I'm not there. We're just going to go Mohammed bin Salman.
It's a different country. It runs in a different way. I don't think anyone needs to be hung up by their heels in the Ritz. I would say actually the leader, I did a funny thing about a year ago, is that I went on the Young Turks. if you know the Young Turks, with Cenk Uygur, and I had a very friendly conversation in a way because we talked about Ataturk, who is basically the man who created modern Turkey, and Ataturk, who didn't have any death camps or anything like that, not a violent guy. Ataturk had so much power, he changed the alphabet that Turks used. He changed the clothes that they wore. He basically dragged the modern empire, the Ottoman Empire, into the modern world. And by the way, Cenk, who is a huge progressive, obviously, is all about Ataturk. FDR didn't quite have the level of power that we're talking about, but close. American progressives are all about FDR. You say to them, we're going to have another FDR, we're going to have another New Deal. How do they say no to that?
So I guess the fear I would have, and I just love the Elon analogy. I want to acknowledge that is if we cast aside all principles. Does that concern? Does that?
I think that when you're ultimately looking at systems that are sort of monarchical, you have to put your sort of moral confidence in one person. And if you think about it, think about like the fortune.
That's a huge ask for a country that our myth, our story is rebelling against.
It's a huge it's a huge ask, and yet we live in the most ironic America in history. We live in an America that is actually sort of ready to like break frames and rebel against old ideas. And the thing is, there's Charlie, there's 500 companies in the Fortune 500. They're all run by a CEO.
Well, some yes, and
some less. Not
some are more like the CDC at times. I mean,
some are
Coca-Cola's like
Coca-Cola is a little more like Coca-Cola.
That's machine politics.
Coca-Cola is still a lot closer to Elon Musk than it is to the CDC, but it's definitely a spectrum.
You'll give me a
there.
little bit, right?
I'll give you a little bit.
Okay.
There's definitely a spectrum there. But the thing is, the idea, of like we're going to basically put our trust in this one person instead of this horrific machine that is doing these just obviously insane things. It's a scary call a little bit, but it's not as scary as keeping with what we're doing.
So that, just to kind of make sure I understand the argument, the binary that you've put forward is current trajectory is more of the same, even worse, hell on earth.
Yes, even if you elect Republicans to the White House and try to have them take control of it.
And then you say, therefore, we need to embrace the greatest of all ironies and become the thing we originally rebelled against. I'm not saying that sarcastically. I'm not even trying to.
And let me sort of ground this in American history a little bit, because there are really two American revolutions. There's one in 1775 and 1776, and there's another one in 1789. There's actually the Constitution. The Constitution is a reactionary coup against the Articles of Confederation. And if you ask anyone, even educated people, about the Articles of Confederation period, the only thing they know is that it existed. They don't know anything about the personalities, the events, whatever. It's been almost entirely airbrushed out of history. It's been airbrushed out of history because it was, if I can use this word on your show, a shit show. And basically, it was a shit show. And then people are like, why don't we take the commanding general of the army and make him king? And Washington was offered that. That was what, after basically seeing 12 years of like turbulent Massachusetts style, like Tea Party 1.0, tarring and feathering mob politics without even the British to be opposed to. They're like, we need a king. And Washington did something amazing. The founding, the true like founding of this republic was like, we're going to create something that's really, I think, the ideal form of government, which is an accountable monarchy. Which is also the way these companies work. Elon has a board. Steve Jobs had a board. Ideally, the board does absolutely nothing. The board does nothing to govern, SpaceX. But if Elon's drug problem gets too bad, if he starts doing really crazy stuff, that board is going to step in. And so you have that kind of safety backup level. And in the constitutional system as it was originally designed, the Electoral College was supposed to be that board. And it just didn't work.
So I guess I'm sure this is an objection you receive a lot, and it's one I share. I want to be honest.
Please.
So you get a Lincoln or you get a Washington, a great man.
Yeah.
And then Marcus Aurelius has Commodus.
Yeah, and so what you need is basically a system that will really actually preserve that like accountable monarchy for the long term. Marcus Aurelius has Commodus, and before then there's this period of the five good emperors.
Pax Romana, right?
5 good emperors, and they're all
last great
selected through adoption. I have a little pet theory about that. I think it was actually a long-running, like, homosexual insider ring. Could be, I don't know. But in any case, Marcus Aurelius breaks
the mold, and he picks his son.
Breaks the mold, and he picks his son, and we've all seen that movie,
Yes,
right?
and Commodus is
and so
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, exactly. Joaquin Phoenix. And so you have to establish something that basically, I think you can learn a lot from the corporate model, which sort of works so well as a model of the accountable king.
Board of directors?
You need some kind of board-like thing. It's a little harder to do at the sovereign level. I have some designs for that, but I don't want to dive way too deep into, utter nerdery here.
Yeah, so is the system that is one of your hypotheses being, since Adams and others would say you need the raw material of moral and religious people, therefore the Constitution, since we do not have a moral and religious people and we kind of have this mishmash of different everything, therefore it's very hard to keep the Constitution?
I would say even more than that. I would say that, there's a great line. I urge everyone to go and read the last 10 paragraphs of FDR's first inaugural, because to say that it is based, it's not even based. It's metal. It's pure metal. And one of the things that FDR says is he says, our Constitution is such a good document that basically we can change the way it's interpreted and we can get anywhere with that. And so when you look at the Constitution and you note that it says the president is the chief executive of the executive branch, it doesn't say the legislative branch should be running the executive branch. It doesn't say the judiciary branch should be running the executive branch. It kind of leaves all of that hanging. And because it leaves all of that hanging, you can look at this document, the Constitution, and you can say, we're just applying this in a slightly different way, and we're taking this branch that has become effectively subordinate, and we're applying, I forget, which was the Federalist paper where Alexander Hamilton talks about...
All men are angels?
But no, where he talks about executive power. Is it 89?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
All men are angels is 51 or something.
Yeah. And so you just sort of need to kind of rotate the Constitution a little bit, and you're still interpreting it sort of very, very clearly, but you're putting the president back in charge of the federal government.
I want to be on the record. I hope you're wrong. I hope
I would love to be wrong.
No, and so talk about that. Do you hope that the Constitution has staying power and that Americans aren't as depraved as they seem? Meaning that the structure can be a little bit revived, and that we don't have, because once you go in this direction, it's not going back. It's just there's so many other.
You're going to a different place.
Because, for example, in the book Good to Great, which is all about corporate turning around, 5 million copies sold.
Yeah.
They talk about, look, as soon as an energetic, charismatic, visionary, genius CEO leaves, there was this Florida-based competitor to Walgreens that were pharmacies. He ran for the governor. What's his name? I can't remember. And it was Walgreens versus this, and it was amazing when he was CEO. He leaves and the company collapses in 15 years.
Yeah.
And so it's really...
You've got to solve that succession problem.
And that's the most innocent example I can give.
Yeah. You absolutely have to solve that succession problem. I believe...
Or that he just becomes a madman. I mean, that's
another... People get brain tumors. It happens, right? And so the thing is, you need the accountability part of that accountable monarchy. But the thing is, when you're in the process of like performing that transition, it's so delicate that you basically say, I have to trust this one person, and I have to trust this one person to establish that accountability system and to make that work. However, is basically, a presidential election is a forum of that kind of accountability. And so you need something that, the idea that basically, the founders were sort of building a machine of government that would last for the ages and govern this incredible continent for the ages. I don't believe that dream is dead at all.
So let me ask you, you alluded to this, and you said every 80 years we kind of have this super president.
It's like the San Andreas fault breaking, yeah.
So then is it a question, is basically what you're saying about saying is that it's either the right or the left that's going to claim that?
I think that it would be very hard for the left, because the thing is, the left has a sort of crabs in a bucket thing where it sort of pulls apart, like, to be a leftist, means you're friends with all the little Faucis or whatever. So to kind of stab them it would take a really, really amazing crisis for that to happen. Whereas,
like a Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, I don't think he could do it. I think that Barack Obama, even there were little places where Barack Obama like differed from, the blob, as his guys called it in the State Department.
Or the Borg, yeah.
Barack Obama, who has no ideological conflicts with these people, couldn't really direct them to do his will.
So the traditional pushback that you'll receive is, hey, we need the courts to disassemble the deep state. What is flawed with that argument?
What is flawed with that argument is that the courts you can't create a vacuum of power. And so to say the courts will, disassemble the deep state.
Let Marshall send his army.
Yeah,
right?
Okay, are you going to have the Supreme Court having an army to like do this? No, you're not. And so you basically see these sort of little conservative judgments. You just saw one on affirmative action in colleges,
Correct.
right? The court is like, no, actually, you shouldn't do this. Well, how is that going to be followed up? Is that going to be followed up by like a giant army of lawsuits ensuring that basically Harvard doesn't have its thumb on the scale for one race or its thumb against?
No, they'll keep doing it with minor adjustments, and they'll say, "Oops, sorry."
And they'll say, "Oops, sorry,"
if they get caught.
They'll say, "Oops, sorry," if they get caught, right? And we've already seen this in California. We went through the whole thing.
They just don't follow the law.
They just don't follow the law. And so the thing is, basically, when the law is a dead letter, you have to realize that rule of law is great. We don't have it. So the question of how we get back to having it, like pretending that we have it, that's not a good way to get something you don't have, is to pretend that you have it. And so, when you look at especially like all of this lawfare, I was just reading this amazing Twitter thread where, the Democrats, if they sort of lost the count, I don't want to say lost the election because it's a count. If they lost the count
I like that.
in 2020,
Write that down. I like
they
that.
were going to do
The
all
count
of the
versus the
things
election.
times 10 that Trump, tried to do a little bit, and now everyone is getting prosecuted for it. They were going to do all those things with the masses in the streets, lawfare, alternate electors. They were going to do it all, right? And so when you have a court system that is fundamentally that deeply politicized, again, I love these black robes. I love, you have a great picture,
Clarence Thomas.
of Clarence Thomas up there.
Love the
Beautiful
guy.
robe. Love the guy. Amazing American. They're like, America is actually not short of virtue.
Talent.
Or talent. We just don't have it in large numbers.
Or in the right places.
Or the right places. We don't even have enough of it to make an oligarchy. But do we have enough of it to make a monarchy? Are there 1,000 people that could do the job that we just talked about? Hell yes.
So then the other part of institutional pushback that I'm sure that you'll receive is you're being overreactionary, neo-reactionary.
Neo-reactionary.
What is your response to that?
If you take reactionary as a political slur, which I sort of used it like gay people use queer, I'm going to come out and say I'm a reactionary. And I'm a neo-reactionary really because I don't actually have a heritage of I'm not a traditional American. I'm basically an American Jewish communist, essentially. And so I don't have any cultural ties at all to the American right. And so I'm a traitor to my class, right? I'm defecting against these this horrible thing that rule by people like me has become. It's worse than you think out there. And so the thing is that basically I would say something, that a great political leader from about 100 years ago once said that, the task of the statesman is to take what is good about the past and learn from it and help to use build the future with it. We can't go back to the past. We can't return to the past. That's completely impossible. We can't turn back the clock and be Massachusetts in 1689. Those people don't exist. We can be our best selves. And the thing is, I'm really confident that with a government that isn't trying to destroy the country, it's an embarrassment, frankly, that we have trouble competing with China. The West has never had trouble competing with the East before, except when the West is really deeply sick. This country, with a government that works, is going to blow China out of the water.
What gives you hope?
The number of amazing Americans that still exist in this country. When you basically, they just need the right structure. And what gives me hope also is that basically, Americans have been getting much less violent and virtuous over time. And so, political systems that rely on them to be like virtuous and violent at the same time, that's a concept that people can't even really parse today. But Americans have also been getting more sophisticated, more ironic. Every movie you see, every like Super Bowl commercial is a joke, right? Ever. And so they're very, very good at breaking out of mental frames. They're very, very good at like breaking their assumptions, at breaking out of Plato's cave, at saying, wow, what if this system was all a joke? What if these ideals don't mean anything? What if all these institutions I was taught to respect and love are just like basically really bad people wearing a skin suit? That's more accessible to Americans than it ever has been. And that's what we need.
Is that uniquely? Are you seeing that in other countries? Like
yeah, it's modern.
In Germany, are they saying, our tradition of altering human biology needs to stop?
Well, Germany's traditions got pretty thoroughly rewritten in 1945.
Sure,
they're like a caricature of Berkeley.
They still
but
worship chemists.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's national culture still there,
exactly.
but the. No, I think that this is definitely, it's an effect of technology, it's an effect of affluence, it's the effect of many, many things. But like the tool that Americans need to basically sort of, see the world as it actually is irony. It is.
So do you think irony is our superpower?
Irony is our superpower.
Finding the things that don't fit?
Irony is in finding the things that don't fit. And
being okay with it?
And being okay with that. And how ironic is Donald Trump? His powers of irony are immense. And that's the thing that he has that Ron DeSanctimonious doesn't have, and like he has, and that feeling of like he's simultaneously incredibly ironic and incredibly sincere. And that's the kind of flavor that it takes to sort of get people to realize that they can do what needs to be done.
Final thought. What books would you recommend for the audience? One or two where they could just, as jumping off points?
Good question. I really like the Chris Caldwell Age of Entitlement book. Yeah. That's sort of fairly solid.
It's a favorite
for
our show.
Deeper political theory, but still very, very readable. There's a book by James Burnham.
Oh, yeah, of course. Sure.
Called The Machiavellian.
Suicide of the West?
Not Suicide of the West, not The Managerial Revolution. Those are both fine books, but his masterpiece is called The Machiavellians, and it was written in 1940, and it's amazing because what The Machiavellians is all about is basically casting aside these illusions and sort of doing what Confucius said, which is to call everything by its true name. And if you can call everything by its true name, you can realize that we don't have an executive branch, we have a legislative branch. And from there, the problem actually starts to look really straightforward and obvious.
So any final thoughts, the way people can follow your work, your writings?
Subscribe to my Substack at graymirror.substack.com. That's Gray with an A, the American way.
You certainly have a talent for pushing the Overton window.
Thank you, Charlie.
And you've been doing this for a couple years.
I have.
I agree with some of it. I disagree with some of it. What I really love is this idea, first and foremost, of challenging our presumptions. But this idea of an energetic executive, I really love. I'm still going to be the stickler for the U.S. Constitution. Call me an idealist. So I hope you're wrong.
We'll see.
We'll see. Curtis, thanks so much.
Charlie, thanks so much.